boys and girls, it's Miss Bissell. We are in our textbook on page 26. We are finishing up our last lesson in our topic 1 unit before we move on to adding and subtracting decimals. So I need you with me on page 26. You're going to need a piece of paper. It would be nice if you would have your math journal out to page 20 or 63. We're going to be referring to page 63, the rounding rules. And one of the things that I want to review with you is a lot of you that I talked to in class this week said that this was the little rhyme that your fourth grade teacher used with you for rounding. Keep calm and remember 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. So I will be referring back to this little rhyming story to help us remember what to do when we are rounding decimals. So page 63 in your journal, we talk about it a little bit at the top. Rounding decimals made simple. Right here it is. These are your rounding rules. 5 or more, raise the score. So your 5 or more numbers would be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 4 or less numbers would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll talk about this in just a minute. So here's some steps. And right here, we're going to look at an example. All right, so on page 26, our essential question that's going to guide us through the lesson is how can you round decimals? So rounding replaces one number with another number that tells about how many or about how much. So we're looking at rounding 236 hundredths to the nearest tenth. And we want to know, is 236 hundredths closer to 2 and 3 tenths, or is it closer to 2 and 4 tenths? Now, let's just remember, we're talking about rounding 2 and 36 hundredths. So if you put a box around that in your book, now that goes out to the hundredths place. So really what we want to think about is that 2 and 3 tenths is really equivalent to 2 and 30 hundredths. And 2 and 4 tenths is equivalent to 2 and 40 hundredths, okay? So that's going to help us a little bit also to think about some things. Halfway in the middle between 30 and 40 is 35, okay? 36 hundredths would be on the number line right beside it. So we're taking 2 and 3 tenths and 2 and 4 tenths. We're rewriting them as their equivalent decimal to the hundredths place. This first place would be 2 and 40 hundredths, 2 and 31 hundredths, 2 and 32 hundredths, 2 and 33, 2 and 34. We already talked about the halfway being 35 hundredths. We've got 2 and 36 hundredths, 2 and 37 hundredths, 38, 39, and then 40 hundredths. 36 is past the halfway mark. So the steps here, you know, for the rest of your life, you're not going to want to draw number lines. So we're going to find the rounding place. So when we round it to the nearest tenth, we're going to underline the rounding place. So 3 is in the tenths place, so it is underlined. All right, and you're going to look at the number to the right of the rounding place. So I see a 6. They put it in red. You'll typically see me draw a little arrow to it. If that digit to the right of the rounding place is greater than 5, then you're going to round the rounding place up 1 digit. If it's less than 5, you're going to leave the rounding digit alone. So 6 is greater than 5. So what that tells me that I'm going to do is I'm going to round up to 4. I'm going to add 1 to the 3. All right, so we drop the digits to the right of the rounding digit. That's important, step 3, and we get 2 and 36 hundredths rounds to 2 and 4 tenths. So I'm going to just work right here and show you something. So 2 and 36 hundredths, we're rounding to the nearest tenths. So I use this little saying right here. To the right of the 3 is a 6. And my question is, if the digit to the right of the rounding place is 5 or more, then I raise the score. So that means that this is going to round up to a 4. This would still be the whole number 2. Don't forget the decimal. So 2 and 4 tenths, it is closer to than 2 and 3 tenths. Okay, we saw it on the number line. It's only 1, 2, 3, 4 away, where it's 6 away from 2 and 3 tenths. All right, so let's look at another example. On page 27, if we were to round 3 and 2/10 to the nearest whole number, the question is 3 and 2/10 closer to 3 or 4? So we could draw the number line, and since we're working with tenths and not hundredths, we can leave this 3 and leave this 4, and this would be 3 and 1/10. They've plotted 3 and 2/10 for us. That would be 3 and 3/10, 3 and 4/10, halfway, 3 and 5/10, or 3 and a half, 3 and 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, and that would be 3 and 10/10, which would be 4, wouldn't it? All right, you can clearly see that it's 2 digits away, or 2/10 away from 3, and it's 8/10 away from 4, so it's closer to 3. So again, here's your steps. If you don't want to be drawing number lines the rest of your lives, you're going to find the rounding place, underline it. So we're rounding it to the nearest whole number, so that's why 3 is underlined. Look to the digit to the right of the rounding place, so we're focusing on that 2. If the digit to the right of the rounding place is 5 or greater, we add 1 to the rounding place. So we raise it up. That's not above a 5. It's not a 5 or greater. So the 3 is going to stay 3. So 3 and 2/10 is going to round to 3, and we drop all the digits to the right of the rounding place. So it rounds to 3. All right. To round 74 and 58 hundredths to the nearest tenth, which digit do you look at? What is 74 and 58 hundredths rounded to the nearest tenth? So we have a two-part question. Let's break it down. We're going to round it to the nearest tenth. So the digit in the tenths place is the 5. So don't forget, we can look back at our rules or at our steps. We're going to look at the digit to the right of the rounding place. It is an 8. So what's going to happen? 8 is a 5 or above. So we're going to raise it up to 6. So this is going to become 74 and 6/10. And since we're rounding to the nearest tenth, then we get rid of all the digits to the right. Okay. Now, I forgot to answer. We were looking at the 8. The first part of the question was, what digit do you look at? We look at the 8 and rounded to the nearest tenth. 74 and 58 hundredths will round up to 74 and 6/10. All right. A car rental service charges customers for the number of miles they travel, rounded to the nearest whole mile. George travels 40 and 8/10 miles. For how many miles will he be charged? All right, so we're rounding it to the nearest whole number. That would be the nearest whole mile. So the whole number is 40. All right, our next counting number would be 41. All right, that we are looking to the digit to the right of the whole number, and that is an 8. So if you go back to our little keep calm, 5 or more, raise the score. We have a 5 or more. We have an 8. So we're going to raise it up. So that just means we add 1. So it is going to round to 41. That is how many miles he will be charged for. All right. So 41 is the nearest whole number to 41, or to 40 and 8/10. All right. So in my explanation, I'm just going to say that 41 is the nearest whole number to 40 and 8/10. All right, now we're going to use the rule, and we're going to be rounding some numbers. So we can go back, and if it's an example where you're rounding to the nearest whole number and you have tenths, you could look at this example. If you're rounding to the nearest, let's see, tenth, but you have hundredths, you could use this example on the previous page. For all of them, we could just use our rhyme and remember, keep calm and remember 5 or more. We're going to raise the score. That means we add 1 to the rounding place, 4 or less, we leave that rounding place number stay. All right, so 16 and 5/10. I noticed that there is a 5 to the right of the 16. We're rounding it to the digit that is underlined. So the 5 says I need to do what? 5 is greater, or sorry, 5 or more. We're going to raise the score. 5 is a 5, so that's going to become 17. 16, 17. 17 is the next counting number. Number 4, 56 and 1/10. We're rounding to the nearest ones, so we want to know, is this number closer to 56 or is it next to or is it closer to 57? The digit to the right of the underlined digit, our rounding digit, is a 1. Guys, that is less, 4 or less. So we would leave this number 56. 1/10 would be a lot closer than to 56 than to 57. It'd be 9/10 away from 57. Number 5, 1 and 32 hundredths. We're rounding to the nearest tenth. We have a 2 in the hundredths place. That would tell me, since it's 4 or less, to leave that 3/10 alone. This number rounds to 1 and 3/10. Since we're rounding to the tenths, we don't need any digits after it on the right. Number 6, 42 and 78 hundredths. We're also rounding to the nearest tenth, except this time we have an 8 to the right of the rounding digit, and since that is more than 5, we need to raise the score. So 42 and 8/10. We add 1 to the rounding digit. All right, 1 and 652 thousandths. We are now rounding to the nearest hundred. So to the right, we have a 2. If we use our rhyme, 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. We have a 4 or less here, so we're going to let it rest with 5. And we have 1 and 65 hundredths. The thousandths place will disappear because we're just rounding to the nearest hundred. Number 8, 582 and 4 hundredths. We are rounding to the nearest tenth. To the right of it, we have a 4 hundredths. That is a 4 or less, so we're going to let it rest. And this is actually going to be 582.0, or since the decimal 0 doesn't change its value, it's just the whole number 582. Either one of those would be acceptable ways to write that answer. All right, we're going to finish up the last 2, and then you're going to do a couple practice problems. Number 9, 80,547 and 645 thousandths. We're rounding to the nearest hundredth. To the right of the rounding digit is a 5. Using our rhyme, 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. We have a 5, so we're going to raise the score. That means we're going to add 1. So we have 80,547, and that's going to become 65 hundredths. We add 1 to the 4. Everything else stays the same to the left. Number 10, 135,701 and 949 thousandths. We're rounding to the nearest tenth. To the right, we have 4. Using our rhyme, 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. We're going to let that 9 rest. That 4 tells me to leave it alone. So we still have 135,701, and we're going to leave this 9/10. We're rounding to the nearest tenth, so we get rid of the hundredths and thousandths. All right, so boys and girls, pause the video, and I would like to see you real quickly round these to the nearest whole number. So we're talking about 4 or 5, 57 or 58. Does that round to 34 or 35? And does that round to 215 or 216? 15 through 18, you're going to round it to the nearest, you're going to round it to the place of the underlying digit. So pause the video, work those out, and when you're ready to go over them, I'll have mine ready for you. All right, so here are the solutions to 11 through 18. 4 and 5/10, we're rounding to the nearest whole number. The 5 tells me that I'm going to round up to the whole number 5. 57 and 3/10, the 3/10 tells me I'm going to leave that whole number 57. 34 and 731 thousandths, the 7 in the tenths place tells me I'm going to round 34 up to 35. 215 and 39 hundredths, the 3 in the tenths place tells me to leave 215 alone. It's going to stay right there. All right, hopefully you did well on those 4 problems. Now let's check rounding to the place value. In 7 and 158 thousandths, you are rounding to the nearest tenth. You have a 5 in the place to the right of it. That tells me to raise the score. That means add 1, and that would be 7 and 2/10. 758 thousandths, you're rounding to the nearest hundredth. To the right of it, you have an 8. That is a 5 or more. You're going to raise the score on that one and make this rounding digit a 6, so 76 hundredths. Your next problem. Give it a second to refocus. 6 and 4,382 10,000ths. We're rounding to the nearest hundredth. The 8 in the thousandths place says that I need to raise the score. This 3 hundredths would become 4 hundredths, so we have 6 and 44 hundredths. And the last one, let's see how you did. 84 and 732 thousandths. The 7 is in the tenths place, rounding to the nearest tenth. The 3 says leave it where it is, so that would be 84 and 7/10. All right, let's flip over to the next page. Again, with the video, pause it when you need to, rewind it when you need to. Make sure you have the examples in the book ready to go. All right, the picture at the right shows the length of an American alligator. What is the length of the alligator to the nearest tenth? All right, so we're looking at tenths. So in the tenth place, let's underline, I see a 3. To the right of it is a 9. So the 5 or more, we're going to raise the score. So we're going to raise this to 4/10. So that would make this alligator 4 4/10 meters. All right, think about that a minute. We use the rules 1, 2, 3, the 3 steps on page 27. All right. Let's see. I am looking over these. Honestly, I am thinking we're good for these right now. So I would like you to go back to page 26. How can you round decimals? I think the biggest thing that we need to get out of it is that we need to find the rounding place and underline it. We need to focus our attention to the digit to the right of the rounding place. And if the digit to the right is 5 or more, then we need to add 1 to the rounding place digit. If our digit to the right of the rounding place is 4 or less, then the rounding digit stays where it is. Page 63 in your math journal is helpful. So are the steps 1, 2, 3 with the examples on page 26 and 27. So have your book open. Have your completed copies or copies of your problems open while you work on your practice buddy. All right, boys and girls, have a wonderful day, and I will see you tomorrow.